Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. My name is Amer Diba. I am the CEO and co-founder of Normalyze. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm accompanied by our friend Bernard Brantley, who is the CISO of Corelight, and he is a great cybersecurity aficionado, to say the least. Before joining Corelight, he had a role at AWS, and before that at Microsoft, all tackling very hard cybersecurity challenges and lots of great experience that he carries with him. Today, he's going to talk about his journey as the CISO of Corelight and how they basically transformed their cybersecurity programs, including the use of Normalize into that, and share his experiences with us and lessons learned along the way. This webinar is recorded, and you can watch it on demand at any time after this. We're live now. If you have any questions during the webinar, please make sure to put them in the questions channel, which is window on the side of the Bright Talk channel. And we will make sure to answer them at the end of the presentation. Also, the deck of the presentation will be made available after this event, along with many other resources that we will publish here, or you can also find on our website. And with that, I would like to leave the floor to Bernard to get started with his talk. Bernard, it's all yours.
Thanks, Amer. As he stated, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to you, wherever you're at today. I'm Bernard Brantley, CISO here at Corelight, and I've been working with Normalyze for almost as long as I've been a CISO. Amer approached me about a month ago and asked if I'd be willing to do a webinar, and I said I'd be more than happy to. So if you'll bear with me for a second through slide sharing, let's get into it. So today I'll be talking about how Corelight transforms data security with Normalize. And I was tempted to, but did not put a line through the data portion there, because this is really about how we evolved our entire security program rather than only focusing on the data. So I thought it would be important to relay to you my overall journey in coming into Corelight, my journey as a CISO, and my journey with Normalize. I think that there are a number of folks in this room who may be first-time CISOs or aspiring to be a CISO. And, I walked into Corelight, logged into Corelight, since we were all virtual when I joined, in March of 2021. And this was my first role as a CISO. And as you can imagine, there was quite a bit of anxiety as well as excitement around taking a new role in a company that I had been supportive of and been a user and buyer of in the past, to kind of shore up their security program as well as extend my own wings in growing my career. Now, Amer mentioned that I was at Microsoft as well as AWS, but my relationship with Corelight and kind of the underlying technology behind Corelight being Zeek extends back much further. So when I was at Alert Logic in Houston a little over 10 years ago, or right at 10 years ago, I was introduced to a technology called Zeek, and it was eye-opening for me. I'd like to say that my career and perception of security as a whole were fundamentally changed when I saw the power of analyzing the network in a way that allowed me to both understand the connections that existed within it, as well as the relationships between the connection and the protocols that were being analyzed and the metadata associated with that. So early on, while I did not know that I was looking at the world in the view of graph, Corelight was instrumental and foundational to me getting this kind of graph-based, relationship-based approach and perspective of the networks that we defend and maintain, as well as the organizations that run those networks. I was was grateful to have an opportunity to bring Corelight and the Zeek technology into Microsoft some years ago to protect their high-value asset environments, and then extended that work at Amazon, where I led threat hunting and threat intelligence. And so the question of why Corelight was a no-brainer. I got to take the technology that I had built my career on, that I came to know and love, that I saw immense potential in, both for discrete network monitoring use cases, as well as its impact on threat hunting and threat intelligence, and kind of take the helm of building my own security program while extending the uses of the technologies to fit a broad security program and potentially influence the product and its future vision. Now, I mentioned anxiety and imposter syndrome, and I think that a number of you can probably identify with this. When I came into Corelight, it being my first CISO role, I got to work with my heroes. So for those familiar with Zeek, Vern Paxson, he's the creator. He worked here. He was on my interview panel. Richard Baitlich, who wrote the Tao of Network Security, was the CISO at GE, worked at Mandiant. He was on my interview panel. And then Gene Schaefer, who was the CISO of a three-letter agency, which I will not name, but she was a member of the company as well. So when I look to my left and my right, I was standing in a room with a number of people who had done it in other places, had been highly effective in their approaches to security. And I felt that I had a lot to live up to, and trying to figure out how to build a program that both met their expectations and experiences in their high-level places, on top of kind of stretching my wings and charting my path as a CISO. Hey, what am I going to do here? Right? So I came in with these grandiose thoughts of being able to take the lessons I'd learned at Microsoft and at Amazon, with the engines that were behind their security programs, with engineering resources, program management resources, really robust leadership, and just hit the ground and start running. Particularly with the graph-based stuff that I had leveraged previously at Amazon, and how we were doing analysis and kind of building up threat models and attacker profiles and attack path management in our cloud accounts. What I figured out when I got to Corelight with a team of one is that was going to be nearly impossible. And not only was it going to be nearly impossible, I had almost no idea where to start. So on the right side of this slide, you kind of see the organizing methodology I used at Corelight, which aligns with the cyber defense matrix, if you've seen that, and or the NIST cybersecurity framework, if you're familiar with that. And I said, you know what? As of day 1 through day 60, I really have no clue how this organizes itself within Corelight. Do I start with trying to identify all my devices, networks, apps, data, and users? Do I take a deep look at how we're protecting or detecting those things? How much of my time is going to be spent responding and recovering from fires that are already in place? It was really a learning period where I had to kind of shut up, sit back, listen, learn. I had a phenomenal security engineer that was on my team when I started, who had a real good grasp of the landscape, was able to plug me in with the decision makers and stakeholders across the business, and really set the tone for how I would behave post my first 60 days. But I think the key point here is that, I was given a relatively broad charter with a large number of environments to go protect, and I had to figure out how to make sense of all of that. So this came a bit later, but I think it's important to relay how I saw the world and how I drive our security team to analyze what investments they're making and how we think about delivering impact to the business. The key points in this slide, and I won't read it all to you, is that we are highly focused on operationalizing and automating anything that it is that we do. If it requires manual work to go achieve, it is not an optimal investment. So we really look across the board to say, hey, where can we deliver the greatest impact? Where can we deliver the greatest impact in an automated way that means that folks don't have to go back and spend time manually investigating, manually pathing tickets, manually analyzing? And how can we deliver that to the teams that depend on our intelligence and our outputs to deliver their products and to build trust both in the security organization as well as with their customers that those products are going to be secure? So I started with the thought that, without a great understanding of the overall landscape to align with the framework that I have, my primary mechanism for discovery is going to be risk assessment. There's a number of client compliance attestations and certifications that we were after. I wanted to build up our ability to threat model and then build defensive and protective controls around those. I knew that incident response was going to be a core part of our program. So figuring out how to deliver postmortems that were effective and in both correcting the issues as they existed today, as well as giving us momentum to develop better and broader security capabilities in the future. That was the core set of things that I wanted to achieve. And I tied it all to risk assessment because that's the language that the business understands. Now, on the previous slide, and I'll jump to the next slide, where you will see the layout of that kind of CSF, the identify, protect, detect, and respond loop. There's this notion of being left of boom. So I pull this from Department of Defense language. Essentially, when we entered the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and I had a classmate at West Point who was affected by this. She was the first African-American female officer killed in the Afghanistan or Iraq war, but it was done through an IED. And this became a huge problem for defense contractors, for military folks on the ground, even civilians that were attached to these things. And we saw the detonation of an IED as a boom event. So essentially, the boom event, everything that happens to the right of it is response and recovery activities. Everything that happens to the left of it is the things that we can do that are proactive, that essentially save lives, but ensure that we've built up the capabilities and mechanisms to do the right size analysis with the right size protective actions and the ability to identify and adjust to intelligence on the ground that allows us to stay safe from harm. We want to focus on those actions that are left of boom, which are particularly in our cases, the identify and detect, because we did not have a great mechanism at Corelight to build up the protect from day one. And this is where we start to get into the kind of graph pieces, which are core to the Normalyze technology, as well as core to my vision. There are essentially two halves to the environments that we protect, as well as the security programs that we are building. There's the structural side, which hits on how our accounts, how our environments, how our organizations, how our identities are set up. And then there's the situational side, which talks about the kind of real-time event level things that are occurring within that structure that are meaningful for us to develop response or detection activities around. And lastly, I don't think this is any secret. It's impossible to make progress within your programs, within your organizations, or within the broader security community without creating and fostering strong partnerships. So in the next 6 months, I got a boost out of nowhere in how to do my job better. So what do I do when I'm a new CISO, aside from trying to figure out what it is I'm doing within the company? I start building relationships. Fortunately, I was directed by one of our VC partners to go talk to Lamont Orange over at, why is this company name blanking to me right now? Lamont Orange, CISO at Netscope. And Lamont and I found that we had a number of things in common. And I started talking to him about this idea I had about, seeing the entire security world through graph. And he said, there's this guy, Ravi. He's kind of building a company. You should probably go have a conversation with him. And through that conversation, Ravi and I identified some of the core problems with the security tooling as it existed today. We aligned on what it meant to think of the world through graph. And he said, oh, by the way, I'm building this thing called Normalyze. Would you be interested in taking a look? And that sparked the relationship that kind of got us to where we are today. At that same time, I decided that putting our executive team through a IR tabletop or game day exercise was probably the best use of my time, both to understand how the executives in the organization thought about security, as well as identifying areas that needed to have a deeper dive and getting awareness for the executive team and what our true risks were. So as an example, I set a scenario and I said to the exec team, hey, we just got a kind of cryptic notification from the FBI field office. They told us that someone that they are investigating has had communication with what appears to be Corelight customers, and they recommend that we go back and I look at our code base for the past 24 months. And so I tasked the executive team. I organized it into, hey, here's a group of folks who are responsible for incident response. Here's a group of folks who are responsible for the actual outreach and market-based response. And then here's the folks on our legal team who need to go see exactly what we're contractually obligated to, where we may be in hot water based on, or where and how we may need to report based on our compliance certifications and otherwise. Post that exercise, I immediately scheduled a pen test to go validate that the thesis on how we responded to the tabletop exercise was correct, as well as kind of put some teeth to here's what I believe to be some of the weaknesses in our environment, and here's what we need to go deliver on as fixes for those in the near term, because these represent our highest priority risks. Normalyze was just being spun up. We were fortunate to get them in our SaaS environment, which was not directly in scope for the pen test, but we did see immediate value in some of the results from the pen test and how that overlapped with the outcomes I got from Normalyze, both on the risks that were presented, the structure of the AWS and cloud accounts that we maintained, and the data that existed within those accounts. So the other thing that comes along with having a SaaS account, particularly if we expect to operate in the European Union, are things like GDPR. So why is data so important? Well, with GDPR, it's all about the data, right? The fact that we may be maintaining or generating personally identifying information either through the analysis plane, which is Corelight's bread and butter product, or through the data that we're capturing from customers and clients and maintaining in that SaaS service are in scope of GDPR. We've got to know where that stuff is. One of the worst situations to be in is get a request for data deletion or a request for data verification, not be able to respond to it, and be hit with one of those massive fines, which in some cases could be an end-of-life event for the company. Secondly, data is extremely important because the old notion that the most impactful part or the most interesting part of my environment or organization to an adversary is my identity and or the servers that I maintain. At the end of the day, it's all about the data. An adversary is trying to disrupt the data that I maintain. An adversary is trying to steal the data that I maintain. An adversary is trying to tamper with the data that I maintain. And that all is everything that else happens as a side effect to that. Without the data, there is, with very small caveats, there is no reason for an attacker to come after our environment. Now, in cloud environments today, we do see an uptick in things like adversaries using resources for crypto mining and to launch other attacks. But primarily, adversaries are after the things that we hold near and dear to the company or that we hold near and dear on behalf of the customers. At this time, after my first 16 months, my team grew from 1 to a team of 3. I built out both the security intelligence organization as well as governance, risk, and compliance and security infrastructure. So some key points here. This is where we saw a lot of benefit with Normalyze as we made our move into SaaS. So one of the things that you will be asked during an assessment or a gap analysis for SaaS is, how do you validate that you are holding or do have in places things that are in scope for GDPR? How do you understand the risk against that data so that we can provide an effective threat model, that our controls are aligned with the risks that we identify and see as highest? And the Normalize platform gave us an immediate capability to go generate those things. Now, on the left side, you'll see that in the profiles, and this is how Normalize does its data scanning, I've highlighted the fact that I have a tag within those profiles that shows the data scanning profiles that are directly associated with GDPR. Things like credit card numbers, names and addresses, social security numbers. Normalize is continuously scanning my S3 buckets so that I fully understand where in my environments I am holding data that may put me in scope for GDPR. Now, on the other side of that is the risk signature. So beyond only holding that data or identifying where it is, where are the high-level risks either associated with the GDPR framework, with the NIST framework, with AWS best practices, where are the risks to that structure in the account, either how I'm configured, how many identities I have access to things, what types of EC2 instances are in there. Where do I see structural risk associated with the data that is in scope for GDPR? Doing this allowed us to quickly move through our audits. I believe we started our audit for GDPR in September-ish timeframe, and we have our GDPR attestation doc back at the beginning of this year. So essentially a 2-month time to audit with minimal impact on resources and engineering, minimal impact on our own resources in security intelligence, and a great win for the broader business. Now, the other portion of that is, how are you doing continuous monitoring, and or how are you validating that the structure that you've set is accurate and effective for the time that you have this account in existence? One of the other key pieces that we use Normalize for is being able to take those risks or take those scans, select out, here's the things that I believe are relevant for GDPR and the accounts that they are relevant to, and send an email whenever those things pop up, or create a JIRA ticket whenever those things pop up. That means that I got an automated mechanism within a tool that I've deployed for a compliance objective that I'm bound by, that allows me to quickly identify and path risks to the proper team and start the timeline for resolution. So let's talk the next 9 months through 18 months, and I'll get into a bit of the future stuff here. Given that I have been able to clarify the picture around that CSF framework, that I now have a great understanding and a capability to identify the devices, the apps, the data that exists on my network. I've got a pretty good representation in the structure that I'm able to see, particularly through Normalize and my cloud accounts, that allows me to say, hey, this is where I've implemented controls, or this is where I need to implement new controls to cover the protect aspect. And then from the detect portion, I've got good from detect around the structure and leveraging Corelight internally with some other tools to kind of do that situational detect capability. And all of these things path into our increased ability to respond and recover. But now what comes after that? I think one of the greatest challenges facing security leaders is, how do you get alignment with the rest of the business? How do you drive value for the broader business? And that has been the probably number one thing that's on my mind, right? As I meet with the other executives on the team, it's not just, hey, security needs this for these reasons so we can improve our security posture. The conversation has changed to, how can I unlock revenue streams within the business by gaining compliance attestations such as GDPR, CCPA, FedRAMP? How can I provide additional value to other businesses who may not have onboarded their applications to our security program yet? And most importantly, how do I give trust and safety references or mechanisms that allow us to understand, is this investment risky or not risky based on the posture that is within any of those environments, based on the identity constructs that are within any of those environments. And given that my team has now started down the path of doing broader business impact assessments, are there additional attributes to these decisions or impacts to these decisions that affect broader teams that we may not have seen or thought about before? And that is all only possible now, given the fact that both due to Normalize as well as the vision that I will get into in just a bit, we are able to represent the world as a series of relationships. So I'm going to pause for a second and just show you how I'm set up today. We own security intelligence, we own security infrastructure, we've inherited IT services, and we own governance, risk, and compliance. I'm going to be selfish and shout out the members of my team because I think I've built a pretty spectacular one, and we're focused on the mission and focused on delivery. But on my security intelligence team, I've got Jane Thibodeau. She comes from experience in the intelligence community, and Diku, who also has experience in the armed services. Taylor Hayes is a fantastic incident response leader. And then I've got Jordan Hare, who is newer on my team, but he really handles kind of the day-to-day ins and outs around our technical and more discrete engineering within that security intelligence team. I've got Lewis Gardner for our security infrastructure team, who he's been, on my right hand through a number of different roles I've had in my career. I was lucky enough to pull both Shandan Chowdhury and Jessica Hart from our internal SRE DevOps team into our secure infrastructure team, giving us the on-the-ground and in-the-weeds intelligence we need to make improvements across the business. And then from the compliance, governance, and risk side, Monique Numa has been instrumental in helping us kind of make the translation between the specific requirements within any of those documents, such as the GDPR spec, NIST spec, FedRAMP gap analysis. She is instrumental in translating those things back and how we operationalize the tool sets that we have the tools that we have to deploy against anything that we need to go learn or understand, as well as translating some of that stuff into value for the business. And last but not certainly not least, I've got Elizabeth Neiswander, who has essentially been a one-person IT shop. I can't speak enough to what Elizabeth has done for our team. But if you think about the mapping between what we do in the security organization and what the requirements of the business are from the IT expectations, that is all on her. So jumping back to how I think about decisions and how we go down the path of delivering additional business value, the security organization is the centerpiece of any enterprise, I believe. We have the most data. We have access to all the organizations. We understand where all the controls are or should be, and we understand the security relevant threats and risks to the business to make assessments on what it is that we should do next. For me, that organizes into decision making at its most basic principle. So if we think about the decisions that are available to the business, it organizes in two ways. People can do something, they can do nothing. If it lands on the do something side, and I look into my environments to figure out where folks have the ability to do something, there's block, there's contain and capture, there's allow something to happen. And that is usually achieved through some level of process execution, some analysis technique, some controls, creation, modification, or removal. But if we think about the world with that construct, we can quickly see that the activities of the developers, the activities of the engineering organization, the activities of our marketing and sales teams, all of those are hinged on decisions which are backed by some process or some control. So we look at the broader organization in the context of, hey, which organization do you belong to? Your organization has a number of people within it, and your organization produces something. Those people in it and that production of something happens through some environment which holds the services and applications which you use to get the job done. And most importantly, as an underpiece of this is the data that those services applications create, read in, or maintain on behalf of customers or the organization. And all of that is graded by controls. So if I hop back for a second and think through, hey, what are the processes and the controls? And I look back to this slide, you can see that there's a linchpin in here, and where all of those things can potentially be influenced or analyzed by the security team. And then how does that stuff reach the outside world? Outside world can be either the broader customer base, outside world can be the broader organization, or if you put your adversary hat on, outside world is the place where the adversary has the opportunity to interact with your organization, with your services, your applications, with your identities. So this is bidirectional. And again, all of that is hinged on decisions, which is where we're highly focused on delivering value and providing proactive intelligence to the business. So if I think about a bit about where we're going, and lots of this is influenced by our relationship with Normalyze and kind of the methodology and mechanisms that we have been able to bring to bear through the platform. But we go back to how I talked about there's a structural side of the security equation and a situational side of the security equation. On the structural side, we're really looking to organize around risk. And that risk can either be business-based, it can be adversary-based, it can be execution-based. But where do I have risk in the organization? How am I able to map that back through a specific owner and into the organization itself? And what assets does that tie to? Is that a physical asset? Is that a digital asset? Is that a resource in AWS? Is that a resource on-prem? While Normalyze does a lot of this structural composition for us, there is obviously much broader than just our cloud footprint. And so we look internally to start building out this graph that mirrors or that aligns with the way that Normalyze has shown us is effective in driving security outcomes and mimicking that within the internal business. I step down for the other part of our structure, which is the identity and the assets. And I really want to understand, particularly from the IT point of view, where do my employees or the resources within companies align with assets that are not necessarily tied to a discrete environment that I have environmental controls around and am focused for, if I think about, hey, what is my attestation boundary for SOC 2 or what is my attestation boundary for GDPR? That is largely the environmental construct where some product exists. But there are interaction points between employees and our business resources and those kind of bucketed or bordered attestation zones that I need to understand what's happening there. So again, Normalyze gives us exactly what we need when it comes to our cloud environments. But as we think internally, we want to mimic that association to all things that we are doing. And again, tie that back at the high level to the organization so that we have linkage between risk and identities and assets. Now, on the right side, and this is aspirational, right? This is not built yet. This is something that we're chasing down. But if you think back just a slide ago where I talked to the primary interaction point between employees, resources, organizations, and products, things that they're producing as outputs, and the environments that hold the services, applications, and data that they are generating, there's a set of controls. And that set of controls allows for some type of activity. That activity could be management activity via SSH. That activity could be serving customers web content via HTTP or via WebSocket. Our view on the world is that these activities can be organized in some way. And so we really focus on building out what we call activity profiles, but what are more akin to baselines to understand within any given control set, within any environment, how can I best associate the assets? And again, asset could be a resource, it could be a data asset, it could be a physical asset. How do I associate assets with a kind of activity that is meaningful to me? Given this view of the world, our intent is that we can identify when assets change activity groups, when they are now behaving in a way that they did not behave previously, or become a part of an activity that is approved, but we did not see this as a part of it, and draw complete linkage back through who owns the control, meaning who has the ability to decide how we mitigate this threat, how we stop this activity, how we modify this activity to something that is more amenable to the organization, and ultimately tie those things back into, all right, how does this impact us structurally? How are we thinking about this in context of the risks that we hold? And how are we thinking about this in the broader sense of here's the assets associated with an organization, here's the blast radius outside of the discrete environment that we're protecting? All of this in aims to get to a place of decision advantage. If we can make decisions more quickly with more information than our adversaries can, we will win. So just some numbers for you to date. This is kind of a brag sheet about the relationship between us and Normalyze. As you can see at date, we've got over 50,000 assets that are being monitored by Normalyze across 40 different accounts. I think the most compelling part of this slide, though, is that you can see in the bottom right, the usage of this tool and therefore the information and intelligence within it is much broader than our security operations team. We've got folks in DevOps, we've got folks in engineering, we've got folks in research, and look to broaden this out to other folks in the organization who have the ability or need to determine the riskiness, structure, and data as it exists within their cloud accounts. I think it's pretty compelling to show that we've got active users in Normalyze nearly every day with an average of about 30 minutes, and which may not seem like a long time, but if you think about the tools that you have at your disposal, for instance, if I was to think about my usage of something like Asana, I pop into that thing for like 2-3 minutes a day, max, right? I pop in, I check it. All right, I move this thing from here to here, done. To show that the teams that are using this and the individuals in those teams that are using this are spending half an hour of their day in this tool, looking through the risks that exist there, looking through the structure that exists there, padding those things into tickets for remediation, I think is really telling of the value that exists within this way of thinking about the world and the constructive graph, as well as the power of having these things at our fingertip in a single platform. So the last thing that I'll mention is that Normalyze has been instrumental in helping us build, strengthen, and maintain relationships across the board. Now, we are building relationships much broader than those that are focused on engineering related tasks. But this kind of shows that, from my first days, 60 days in, where, hey, I'm a new guy, I know nothing, I don't know who's here, I don't know who owns what, to today, we've built and maintained working relationships within engineering, within SRE DevOps, within our research team, and all path through security intelligence ability to deploy a tool that they find useful, as well as generate intelligence that allows them to do their jobs better. With that, I'm all done. Floor is yours, and I'll open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Bernard. Very, very thoughtful and detailed talk. So we have some questions already coming in. I'll start with one about the deployment and kind of how you approached it with Normalyze, what worked, what didn't, and what are some of the lessons learned there that you can share with others.
Yeah, so deployment at first was relatively easy. You provided us with a cloud formation template. We were able to get that up and running rather quickly in the investigator account, but we saw that the preferred method of deployment for our DevOps team was going to be Terraform, which was a feature that you all did not have yet. I think that you all turned around Terraform templates for us in less than a week, and we were able to deploy in the preferred method for our DevSecOps teams. Now, the second part of that is that I don't like to do anything piecemeal. I was telling my team earlier today, if this does not apply to the broader organization, if we have to do this as a one-off, we're not going to do it. So we need to go back and figure out how this single effort is going to give us complete coverage across our entire swath of monitored or secure responsibility areas. And so with that in mind, and the ability to deploy via Terraform, we were able to instrument at the organizational root within our AWS account to whenever some new account is created, it is included within the Terraform template and automatically populated in Normalyze.
Okay, very good. Yes, I recall when we worked on that feature together, and now it's part of the platform, of course. And tell us in terms of your deployments right now, where is mainly your applications across what clouds, and are there different challenges from one cloud to the other, or pretty across the same across all clouds?
Yeah, the deployment is easy across all. So I have currently got Normalize deployed across GCP, Azure, as well as AWS. One of the things that we've been challenged with, but not yet deep dived on, primarily because it is, I won't say a rogue account, but it's less used operationally, is our Azure deployment. And the structure in Azure is much different than that in AWS or GCP. And so one of the challenges in looking at Azure, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't have the technical bits to kind of deep dive into it with you, but the way that the Azure accounts are supported, everything essentially cascades down from a single object. And so getting the clear delineation of roles, responsibilities, resource types, how it's owned, has been a less clear thing for us than it is in AWS and GCP.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, we're working on, we have full Azure support now, and we can definitely help with that part when you're ready. So, and there's also a question in terms of how you use the data, that operationalize it kind of within your workflows between the different teams. What type of automation are you putting in place?
Yeah, I'd say the primary area for automation is around the GDPR risks, and then risks that we identify as a result of incident retrospectives. So once we have an incident and we identify, hey, this is a structural weakness that allowed for that incident, creating that as one of the automations within Normalize, creating it as one of the automations within Normalize, and B, ensuring that it gets fixed through a ticket that we created as a result of the incident and set a time frame for resolution for. It gets fixed, and then we have the automation in place and Normalize for it to automatically pop and path the ticket to that same team should that risk reoccur. The second place where we operationalize this as a portion of our incident response capability. So if we identify any incidents within our AWS infrastructure, typically the first move is to jump into Normalize, identify how that resource is created and organized structurally with respect to the resources around it, with respect to the identities that it holds, and most importantly, the policies that govern it. Normalize gives us all that information so we can pull that back, go through the incident response process with a clear picture of everything that could have been impacted and or everything that needs to be fixed, and drive that as here's our expectations through resolution. And it's included in a detailed way as the ticketed item for resolution. One of the things that I think I put it in the slide, but I didn't talk about it too much, is the fact that we maintain a risk register. And so not only do we path items for incident response through the Normalize ticketing system, but we also have items that we've captured through Normalize that make it directly into the risk register. So some of those things are obviously lower priority because the high ones we go about fixing immediately, but where it's a broader effort to say, hey, we've got to rethink, or engineering needs to rethink how we've architected this portion of our cloud account because there's certain risks that exist. Those things get bucketed up. They have a direct risk statement associated with them, and they're pathed to the proper team.
Fantastic. And right now, when the fixing is done by your DevOps folks, I assume, correct? So
that's right.
So you connect directly to a ticketing tool to provide the information and they provide the necessary automation to fix the problem.
Yep.
Great. And then just to touch on compliance, can you explain to us how you use the data a little bit more in terms of kind of mapping it to the various regulatory frameworks that you're tracking, and how do you ensure that you are using the information to help you understand where you are in compliance and where you're not and what's missing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest piece here is the GDPR, because that is immediately impactful for us. We've had already, we spun up our SaaS offering a little over 8 months ago. And the interesting side effect of creating a data processing agreement for a SaaS product is that it applies to the broader company now. And so now that we've got a DPA up on our website, we've got folks that are reaching out to us that, for whatever reason, Corelight has sent them an email or sent them, some type of marketing material or contacted them, and there's data deletion requests. So the question becomes, how do we know that we're done with this data deletion request? We hope that these things have not migrated their way into systems beyond maybe our Salesforce or our Salesforce or our marketing list or otherwise. But how do we go validate that? And being able to leverage the Normalyze tool to quickly scan the cloud accounts where we've got data that we may have inherited, where we've got data that may have persisted, and say, nope, it does not exist there. And our path to getting that resolved exists in this platform versus having to go scan each individual S3 bucket manually, try and download and remove, right? We've got quick pointers to that from the platform itself. The second area is that, I showed on that one screen that we have tags associated with GDPR that allow us to do that both on the data side as well as the risk side. But there's also tagging in there that aligns with, you've got FedRAMP in there, you've got NIST 800-53 in there. So we build our program along that cybersecurity framework for identify, protect, detect, and respond. And then underneath that, we've got the specific 800-53 controls that we're interested in implementing. So we can get clarity. So there's two metrics that I report to the board. I report coverage and I report completeness. Do we have coverage for this area within the cybersecurity framework or within the NIST spec? And how complete are we against it? Being able to quickly go evaluate our cloud accounts to say that, hey, from a NIST controls perspective and a NIST risk perspective, here's how complete the controls we've implemented are. Here was the account when we started, the number of risks that were associated, those that are tagged with 800-53, and here's been our forward progress after implementing control A, B, and C that aligns with A, B, and C in the NIST spec. Here's both verification that we implemented the control as well as that it's working effectively. That is the second place that we leverage the Normalyze technology when it comes to compliance.
Okay, great. Is there any specific workflows or reports that you end up generating from the tool for compliance officers, for for example, you mentioned your SOC 2 audit. What type of output or reports you were able to create for that?
Yeah, so today I would say that we're not using reporting in Normalyze well. Our previous, the way that we handled this via audit was I jump in, or one of my engineers would jump in and show them the Normalyze platform, show them kind of that snapshot that you got of how we're covered against rules and how that aligns with the spec, and then just do a quick search through the account that we're attesting to against those values and essentially show an all clear, or at least show mitigative controls for areas where those things popped up. And they take a screenshot and include it in their report. Going forward, as we improve our ability, our internal audit and reporting capability, I can see us leveraging the tool in a different way to get kind of that daily or weekly view that supports my quarterly business reports. But today, that's just not been an area that we've put the resources to yet.
Okay, very good, great. There's a question on cost. I can answer that. We charge based on the scope, number of accounts, number of assets, data, terabytes of data you're scanning. It's pretty straightforward. We have a freemium. You can start with that on our website and then upgrade as needed. It's all annual subscriptions based. I think with that we are reaching the end of the webinar. We're exactly at the dot here. I want to thank you, Bernard, for your talk today. You put a lot of effort into it, and it's just very nice to hear all these details and your journey with us and in general at Corelight. Thank you for that. As I said, the presentation will be available on the Bright Talk channel. You can view it on demand. We will also put the slide, make the slides available. If you have any questions, please follow up with us directly through at normalyze.ai. We love customers. We want to hear from you. And thank you again, Bernard, and have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.